So welcome to Maui College's Mālama series, Self-Talk for Success. Get more done, feel better doing it. This session will reveal the self-talk that can drive pessimism and procrastination. Learn 3 simple interpersonal techniques to flip the script so you can get more done and feel better doing it. And with us today is Gilbert. He's an assistant professor of speech and communication at Leeward Community College, and he teaches lesser known communication skills that give students an edge in personal and professional life. And thank you so much, Christian, for volunteering to be with us today. We so appreciate you, and take it away.
All right, well, thank you so much, Joyce, for the introduction, and thank you to everybody for being here. This is a lot of fun. Never would have had a chance to visit all of our other colleagues from the other islands if it wasn't for Joyce setting this up for us. So I really appreciate it, and thank you, everyone, because there's a lot of things that we could be doing with our time right now, but you chose to be here and to share this time with us, so it's great to have you here. Thanks for having me. So if we haven't had a chance to meet before, my name is Gilbert, and I live on Oahu. I teach speech and communication. And so normally when people get to know me, they come into class very nervous and apprehensive. They don't like me already because I'm the one that makes them go do presentations, or we have to do nerve-wracking stuff like interviewing, like one-on-one communication. That's what we tend to think of when we hear about the field of communication. But there's also a kind of hidden, easy to overlook part of communication that's become really important over the last year and a half or so. And that is, instead of interpersonal communication or public speaking, this is intrapersonal communication. That is speaking with ourselves, the kind of self-talk that we're left to when we're left to our own devices, when there's nobody else around. And so that's what this workshop is going to be all about today, is kind of noticing the kind of default self-talk that tends to take place when left unattended, and then learning about how to harness that self-talk to start leading it into a direction that we want. Maybe it's to deal with stressors, maybe it's to be more productive, whatever it is for you, you have a whole skill set waiting to be tapped into. That's what we're talking about here today. So before we get started, I'd like to get a chance to hear from everybody for a moment. I want to make sure that you all have the exact same access to the first row ways to interact with us here. So there's going to be 3 main ways that we're going to be interacting today. I'm going to be talking a lot, maybe about the first half or so, but later on in today's session, around the second half or so, it's going to be very much about what's going on your side of the screen, as opposed to the things that I have prepared to say. So I want to make sure that you all have access to the exact same kinds of tools and you get a front row seat. So the first of the 3 tools is the little chat bar. So if you take a look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can see a little chat function there. If you give that a click, then you can jump over into the chat bar. I'm going to ask you to say hello with wherever it is that you're from right now, because we have people from all around the islands and it's a lot of fun. So you can jump in there, and I'm going to type in there, aloha from Aiea, Oahu, because that's where I'm at. Hey there, Misty. Thanks for joining us from Maui campus. Let's see. And I think I want to make sure we get usernames, but there's also our real names. Is it Barbara? I see you there. Barbara is chiming in. Terrific. Thanks, Barbara. I think you were with us before, weren't you? I think maybe. Yeah, it's good to see you again there, Barbara. Let's see. We've got Joyce there from Maui. We've got Kristen. Hi there, Kristen. Hey there, Shauna. Good to meet you. All right. Ooh, hey there, Jenny. Good to see you, Jenny. Cheryl's joining us from Molokai. That's so cool. Ooh, Kahului. Right on. I see Jay Thine. Do I call you Jay? Let's see. We got Puna joining us from Maui. Ooh. Ka'alaea. We got another friend from Oahu here with me. That's cool. See, I would have had no idea. Well, anyway, thank you, everybody. That's one of the 3 ways that you can jump in, and you can ask questions at any point in time. You can throw in your own stories or anecdotes. You can heckle the speaker, whatever it is that you want to do through the chat function. The second way that you can jump in here with us is going to be with our cameras. So it's completely up to you and like your comfort level and your bandwidth. Later on, it's going to be really helpful if we have the ability to see you and interact with you non-verbally. But for right now, just to make sure that we have the same tools, if you look at the bottom left of your screen, there's a little camera icon there. And if you were to toggle that off, just like I'm going to do now, give that a try to turn off the cameras. Then we won't be able to see you, but we would still be able to hear you. Like you should still be able to hear me right now. And then it would be like a podcast or a radio show. Outstanding. And then you can click that same button to toggle it back on again. There we go. Now I'm back. So then we would get to see you and kind of interact non-verbally with raised of hands and stuff like that. So right now I understand our bandwidth is a little bit limited. Might make sense if we have our cameras off, but later on, if you're willing and able, we'd love to have you on camera to be in the front row for the interactive portions. And then the third mechanism that we can use to interact here, I think everybody should have access to this, is going to be through our microphones. Now, of course, in the bottom left, you can click to enable or to disable your microphones, but there is also, for many of us, a hotkey, a secret hotkey shortcut that we can use to interact. And it's so easy to use, you don't even have to use your fingers to press the hotkey. As long as you're holding down the space bar, for as long as you're depressing the space bar, your mic should unmute and you'll be able to talk really quick, and then you can release it and then it would mute you again. So easy, you don't even have to use your fingers for this. So to try this out, I'm going to ask you all at home to go ahead and clasp your hands together like this. Wonderfully done, perfect. And now, even just using your knuckles, I'm going to ask you in a moment, I'm going to count backwards from 3 to 1. And the moment I hit 1, we're going to press the space bar down with our knuckles, and we're going to do a Zoom no-no. We're all going to talk at the same time. I'm going to ask you to press down the space bar and just go, hello, everybody. And then you can release the space bar, just to test it out. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Aloha, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Perfect. Wonderfully done. Outstanding, everyone. Thank you so much. So those are the 3 main ways that you have the ability to interact today. You can jump into chat, you can wave at us here on camera, or you can jump on your microphone at any point in time. If you have any questions at all, or any heckles. Now, I'll try my best to make sure I keep an eye on the chat to make sure I don't leave anybody behind. But if I do miss 1 or 2 things, then also feel free to jump on mic and say, hey, Chris, you ignored so-and-so there in chat, because sometimes I get a bit carried away. All right, so we are here to talk about self-talk, intrapersonal skills. Now, the intrapersonal skills that we're talking about are because lately we've kind of started to blur the boundaries of our duties for work lately. Used to be we would show up at a certain time and we would go home at a certain time. Pretty clear distinctions. But now for a lot of us, it's kind of blurring the line. I'm actually talking to you right now in my bedroom. So where does work end and where does home life begin? It can kind of feel like we're always on call. This is a kind of work that the billionaire Peter Drucker calls knowledge work. And knowledge work are those tasks that don't really have clear edges. If we were all farmers, then after a season of growing crops is done, we harvest everything and we're clearly done. We know when we're done. But for us, our grading process could always be a little bit better. Our promotion document could always be revised 1 more time. When do we know when we're done? And especially when do we know when we're done? When the boundary between work and home life starts to blur. A lot of us are even taking on new tasks now because we're starting to lose some other positions. So it's kind of hard to find the boundaries, which means that all these different voices in our minds start to kind of overlap. Our personal hat is on at the same time as our work hat and all kinds of stuff. Now, for a lot of people in my field in communication, when they hear intrapersonal communication, they think, no, that's just thinking. That's not communication, which makes a lot of sense because communication has to be between 2 different people. But here's kind of the weird mind trip that kind of blew my mind when I first thought about it. There are multiple yous. There are multiple yous. If any of us are on the other side of the camera, I think I saw some of us doing a little bit of note-taking. Well, who is it that we are writing to when we're taking notes? We are writing to future us because we're thinking that that person who is different might be able to benefit from what present us might have in mind. It's a different us. That's unreal. They're all different kind of versions of us. And so the one different kind of us that I think is really important to look at in this world of knowledge work with unclear edges is the conscious us and the unconscious us. Now, if those words are a bit esoteric and hard to wrap your head around, it is for me. It's probably easier to think of the different us's as a controlled us versus an effortless us. Like automatic, effortful and controlled, effortless and automatic. We have an idea of what it's like to be on autopilot sometimes. Show of hands. Has anybody here walked into their kitchen, opened the fridge, looked inside, and closed the fridge, and you didn't know what was inside? Does that happen to any of us? A couple of us? Yeah, it's the weirdest thing, isn't it? Oh, there we go. Some of us doing the thumbs up on your cameras. Thanks, everybody, for jumping in there. I didn't even talk about the reactions button. Yeah, that's so trippy. It's because the conscious us wasn't invited, wasn't a part of that conversation. Unconscious us Opened the door, looked inside, went through the motions, but nothing stuck. So we have to open it again, look inside. How about this one? By show of hands, has anyone looked at their phone to check the time, put their phone away, and you didn't know what time it was? Have you had that happen to you? Yeah. Strangest thing, isn't it? We have to pick it up. We have to look again. And sometimes we open it up and we kind of get carried away. We see a notification, so we start reading the notification. Then we jump into social media and we think, what was I doing? We still don't know the time. So the automatic unconscious us sometimes has a different agenda and conversation than the effortful, deliberate, conscious us. And we'll get kind of mixed up. Now, this is an important kind of self-conversation to be aware of because our conscious selves and our unconscious selves are pretty different. If you think about this, if you have enough room to do this at home, if you stretch your arms out in front of you like this, as if you're, or side to side, like a big T, humans have been around for a long, long time. If the entirety of your outstretched arms is how long humans have been humans, then the versions of us that have been around with language and math and schools and jobs would be about the length of your fingernail. You can take a look at the length of that fingernail. So that's a long time for us to have conscious problems. If your arms are still out, you can put them down now. Starting to get tired. And so consciousness is kind of in alpha testing. Now, we've had lots of different release cycles for our unconscious automatic selves that respond to stressors or move towards rewards. But this very effortful, deliberate selves that invent calculus or write tenure documents is still kind of in alpha testing. Natural selection may not have even decided whether it's going to keep consciousness around yet. And that's kind of fun to think about. And so the psychologist Jonathan Haidt made a little analogy, suggesting that our unconscious self is kind of like an elephant. It kind of moves around instinctive, it lumbers about, and wherever it wants to go, it's going to go. And our conscious self is kind of like a rider on top of the elephant who can kind of guide and direct the elephant, but can't really tell it what to do. Our conscious self, we can say, I am going to eat healthier this week, but our unconscious self still might make a beeline for the desserts. Our conscious self might say, it's time to hunker down and finish this stack of grading. And our unconscious self, the elephant, might veer its way over towards Netflix to binge again. So we can try to influence, we can't really control. So having a healthy dialogue of self-talk between our conscious and unconscious selves can allow for better alignment, so that the more responsible decisions that our deliberate, effortful self can make are easier to adopt for the lumbering, instinctive elephant unconscious self that likes to effortlessly go wherever it wants to go. Now, if these are the two selves that we're trying to create a better dialogue for, there's a big obstacle that's worth knowing about. And I'll create a little thought experiment for you, and you can let me know what you think in the chat. I'm going to have you imagine that we are a primitive human out on the savannah. You're a primitive human, and as you're out there doing your hunter-gatherer thing, you notice a sound, a little rustle in the grass behind you. In chat, I'm going to ask you, what comes to mind? What could it be? Go ahead. There's no wrong answer. It's a thought experiment. What do you think it could be? Whatever springs to mind, you are absolutely correct. Ooh, could be a mouse, could be an animal, Cheryl says. Yeah, could be. Yeah. What kinds of animal? Misty says it could be a gremlin. It could be. Donna says could be a cat. Yeah, it could be. For sure. All kinds of stuff. Could be some kind of a predator, Cheryl says. Oh, it could be a predatory cat. Really big cat. Really big mouse? I don't know. A character from Dr. Seuss. Could be Sam. So tiger. Could be the Grinch. Out to ruin our holidays. It could well be. Okay. So I'm looking at this list, and I think I see a pattern. That in general, the responses that you typed into chat fall into one of two different kinds of categories. On the one hand, whatever it is that's making the sound in the grass behind us, it could be safe. It could be a cute little mouse. It could be a cute little kitty cat. It could be the wind. It could be benign. That's one category of stuff that we listed. The other category of stuff is that whatever's in the grass could be dangerous. It could be a big scary cat. It could be a Grinch out to ruin our holiday. It could be a tiger. Who knows? So we're either safe or we're in danger. And I think that's a pretty fair list. Ultimately, those are the two categories. Now, primitive us would have to make a calculation in that moment. Now, I'll take you out of the hot seat just to say, for argument's sake, let's say it's me out there, so I'm the one that suffers the consequences. Let's say I'm the one out there, and no matter what I decide, I'm going to be wrong. If I assume that it's a dangerous predator and I run away, but I was wrong, what happens? Go ahead, you can let me know in chat. What happens to me if I thought it was dangerous and I ran away, but it was actually just the wind or a mouse, something like that? What happens? Make it back home. Maybe I'm a bit winded. Lose an opportunity? Maybe I lose an opportunity, yeah, to be out there kind of scoring some more food and berries and things, yeah. Well, whatever the case is, I've lost opportunities, but not really much else. If anybody else saw me, maybe I get a little bit embarrassed. Nothing, but I feel anxious, Joyce says. Sure, yeah, so nothing happens to me, but maybe I feel anxious. So that's one scenario, if I'm wrong. I get teased for being a chicken? Yeah, just like modern day. And what if it's option number 2? If I think it's safe. I go, that's just a little mouse. So I stay put, but I'm wrong. In chat, what happens to me then? What's the outcome of this version of being wrong? It was actually a tiger. It was hungry. Misty says, you were screwed. Could be eaten. Get eaten alive. Could be dangerous. Yep, there we go. There's a very common theme there. You bet. So the stakes are remarkably different for being wrong if we assume safety or we assume danger. So we descended from the ones who assumed it was dangerous. You've probably been very familiarized with the phrase fight or flight, that our first instincts when dealing with uncertainty are to get maybe really mad at somebody so we can beat them, or to get really scared about a situation so we can leave and go bury our heads in the sand. Fight and flight. We still have those instincts. Remember the arm stretched out thing and a little fingernail's worth of time in modern days? Well, every baby that's born today is born expecting the Stone Age, is born expecting fight or flight. And so what we have is this kind of natural disposition to freak out. It's what researchers call negativity bias. The problem is that nowadays, our stressors are different. Our stressors are very real. But instead of being attacked by a tiger, nowadays our stressors are things like, I have to grade a whole bunch of papers, or I have to end a difficult relationship, or I have to write a lot of exams, or I have to get ready to go for tenure promotion, something like that. Real problems, but they're not being stalked around every corner by a deadly predator out to kill us. Except our brains are still responding to that kind of threat. Not because our brains are dumb, it's because our brains are actually really good. They were looking out for us. Just nowadays, not really necessarily keeping us happy. So what we have is a kind of default setting on our freak-out meter. Our freak-out meter is finely tuned at a resting level that's pretty high, so that when budget cuts hit, we get really, really stressed. Or when we're behind on grading or on emails, we can get really, really stressed. Or if we have to put on masks nowadays to go out, we get really, really stressed. This is what's often referred to as the second arrow in Buddhist parables. That if you get shot with one arrow, that hurts a lot. If you get hit with a second arrow, that really, really hurts. The first arrow is whatever the circumstance is. It's going to take time to get through this pile of papers. It's going to take time to write a document. The second arrow is the kind of rumination that we have, the meaning that we ascribe to the event. Because of this, now I'm never going to be able to have time with my family, or because of this, I'm never going to be able to have a normal birthday, stuff like that. The rumination is the second arrow. Because our default setting is so high, we're really prone to this kind of self-talk, this kind of ruminating self-talk. What I don't want to do today is to just introduce you to this theme that your brain is prone to freak out. Bye, and then leave you with that. It's not terribly helpful. So I think what I'd like to do to be as helpful as possible is to give you 3 specific ways that our brains keep that meter dialed up really high. Because if we can spot those 3 mechanisms, then we can learn to work around them. So I'm going to walk you through 3 different ways that our brain kind of tricks us into staying freaked out. And I'm going to give you, most importantly, 3 specific techniques that you can use to reset the dial, to be a bit more deliberate about your self-talk, so that we don't immediately jump into our second arrows and stay freaked out. So here is the very first trick of our minds. This is a little trick called cognitive ease. Oh, and before I jump into cognitive ease here, I see a raise of hand there, Barbara. Yeah, do you have a question or a thought to jump in with? Or is that just left on accident? Were we raising our hand for something? No problem there, Barbara. Thanks. Okay. Just didn't want to make sure I was leaving anybody behind. So cognitive ease is the first trick of our minds here. Essentially, the way that cognitive ease works is that whatever it is that we think about repeatedly, we can think about easily. Yeah. Our brains are more likely to adopt the ideas that are repeated. You can think about this example. Has anybody here ever played Punch Buggy? Yeah, show of hands. We ever played Punch Buggy? Yeah, a few of us. It's a good way to, it's a good game to play with friends that maybe you don't want to hang out with for too long. Punch Buggy, if you've never heard of it, anytime that you see, what is it, is a VW bug drive by the car, you yell out, Punch Buggy, and you punch him in the shoulder. Right? The friend, not the car. That's Punch Buggy. Now, the moment that you start playing Punch Buggy, what do you start seeing everywhere you go? You start seeing VW bugs. Now, you never used to see them, but because we're kind of primed to look for them, they become easier to spot. And every time we spot one of those cars, it makes it easier to spot again. Cognitive ease is kind of like digging out a groove in our minds. And the more we dig on that groove, that we think the same thought, the easier it is for thoughts to go down that path. Now, Punch Buggy is kind of a silly little example that you might play with your friends, but that's one that's deliberate. Cognitive ease takes place all by itself. The elephant, the unconscious self, is really good at this all on its own. Maybe the first car you ever got. I'll bet as soon as you got that car, you started seeing other cars just like it around there. No one had to invite you into a game of spot your own first car. You just started doing it. Now, this can also happen, apart from being automatic, it can also happen for things that aren't necessarily helpful for us. For example, if I have the idea in my head that Mondays are the worst, oof, well, anytime something comes up that reinforces the idea that Mondays are the worst is going to create another etch in that groove for Mondays are the worst. I might wake up a little bit late on Monday morning and think, oh, here we go. Or maybe the hot water for my tea was kind of gross. I didn't use the filter or something like that. Or maybe there's traffic and think, oh, of course there's traffic. Every little opportunity for that thought to get reinforced digs in that groove for, oh, Mondays are the worst. There's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system, RAS, that's really good at looking out for new data points that reinforce this ease for us. And after a while, we start going to ourselves, yep, Mondays are the worst. Which is interesting because those exact same experiences for a different person with a different story in their heads would be totally different. Maybe someone who oversleeps a little bit doesn't really notice it. They just think, oop, okay, time to move on to the next task. Or they get stuck in traffic and they might think to themselves, oh, I finally get time to listen to that audiobook or that podcast that I've been putting off. I've been wanting to do that. Different kinds of objective experiences in our lives will have different impact on us, depending on the story we make out of it. And whichever story it is that we start telling ourselves the most often becomes the easiest one that starts to dominate our lives. So it's worth, at the very least, spotting exactly what kinds of thoughts we're having over and over again. It was the American philosopher Will Durant who put it very well, I think, when he said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. That's kind of interesting to think about. We are what we repeatedly do. So what do we repeatedly do? Are we repeatedly taking moments to appreciate the things in our lives? Are we repeatedly complaining about stuff? Are we repeatedly gossiping about people? Who knows? But whatever it is that we're repeatedly doing, chances are at least some portion of that is on autopilot. It's being driven by our unconscious selves. The elephant's kind of bambling around, while the writer may not even be noticing what's going on. So, what I'd like to have us do is, as writers, to notice what our elephants are doing, what it is that we're repeatedly doing, because that is what we become. So, this is our first real technique that we can use to kind of reclaim our unconscious self-talk. If we want to get used to spotting what kinds of thoughts we have all the time, then you can try out a little exercise I like to call weight training. Weight training is a little technique that you can use little bits every day just to get more used to seeing what it is your mind is doing. What is your unconscious self ruminating on or thinking about or doing? Because one of the advantages/disadvantages of the minds that we have today is that we're pretty good at forecasting things. One of the perks of having a human brain is we have a larger prefrontal cortex. And that prefrontal cortex is all about simulating possibilities, like jumping into the future. Here's what's going to happen if I don't turn in this document in time. And so what often happens is we'll find things to worry about in the future. A deer that almost gets hit by a car doesn't go into the woods and start thinking, oh my gosh, that was so close, that's the worst. Nope, it goes right back to its life, eating the leaves. But we carry things with us. Or we'll even look back and we'll dig up stuff to feel guilty about. Weight training allows us to spot the kinds of patterns that we have. Maybe for you, it's jumping into the future, worrying about the next big thing. Maybe for you, it's digging back into the past. The way weight training works is we ask ourselves several times, what am I thinking? That is the weight in weight training. What am I thinking training? What we do is throughout the day, instead of just being pulled from one thought to the next, we take a moment to pop out of our stream of consciousness and become self-aware for just long enough to wonder, what was I thinking right then? When I opened the fridge door, what was I thinking? Was I actually hungry or was I just bored? If I was walking into another room, what did I come in here for? Another one of those automatic tricks of the mind. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but I walk into a room and I think, why did I come here? I forget. I'll even say out loud, what am I doing? My wife catches me sometimes. So what we can do is we can start being self-aware by practicing this weight training. What we actually have here is kind of a smaller version of mindfulness meditation. Now, mindfulness meditation is a terrific skill, and it's honestly worth its own workshop all to itself. Those who practice mindfulness meditation actually decreased the size of their amygdala. They changed the gray matter in their minds that were more receptive to things like nervousness and anxiety. And so it actually physically made them more resilient for stressors. Now, that might be a tough sell for a lot of us, telling us all to sit down for 5, 10, 20 minutes at a time and to meditate. And so if you're a bit fidgety and skeptical, then you can try this as kind of a miniature meditation. So how do you remember to practice weight training, to pull yourself out of the stream of consciousness? There's a couple of different ways to pull yourself out. One way is to use a weight that's physical, like this. This ring might be my physical weight. The way it works is if you have a ring like this at home, you can take a ring off of your finger where it normally lives, and then you can put it on the wrong finger. You ever wore a ring on the wrong finger? Feels weird, doesn't it? You're always kind of aware. Well, the moment you become self-aware of that weird feeling, you ask yourself, boop, what am I thinking? And so if you decide to practice weight training for maybe 2 to 3 hours or something, or like an afternoon, you wear the ring on the wrong finger for the afternoon. And whenever you're in the midst of something and you become self-aware, ooh, what was I thinking? Oh, I was worrying about them not having all the stuff I wanted at Safeway when I go to pick up groceries today. Oh, cool. And so over time, this allows us to spot the patterns. It allows us to see what we repeatedly do. What you also might try, if you start noticing some specific trends, you can even create weights for specific things. The author and speaker Will Bowen has a little exercise that he teaches audiences about having a complaint bracelet. You wear a bracelet on your wrist, and every time you catch yourself complaining out loud, you take it off and you put it on the other wrist to mark the complaint. And then you switch it back for every complaint, because it makes us aware of how often we're complaining. We are what we repeatedly do. Are we complaining? Are we thanking? Are we appreciating? What are we doing? It's worth spotting. Now, maybe you don't necessarily have a ring that you can use as a physical weight. Chances are we all have something as a physical weight. Maybe you wear a necklace on the outside of your shirt. You put it on the inside of your shirt. Every time you feel it against your skin, oh, what am I thinking? Maybe you carry your keys in one pocket of your bag. You switch pockets every time you reach inside. Oh, what am I thinking? If you're stuck at home and you're just maybe not like putting on your jewelry and stuff, great. You can put on socks, like on the wrong feet. You know, like how socks feel weird on the wrong feet? Every time you feel them, what am I thinking? Maybe you're thinking, no way, I'm teaching and all I'm doing is getting dressed from the waist up. I'm not wearing socks or other things. Great. Put little post-its around your house. You can write on the post-its, W-A-I-T, and you stick them on door frames at about eye level. So whenever you walk through, you can't help but wonder, oh, what am I thinking? Is it ruminating on the past? Is it worrying about the future? Is it appreciating someone, or am I taking something for granted? This, even by itself, is probably worth the price of admission. Just by being aware of the kinds of thoughts we have, we start of that stream of consciousness. Because left to our own devices, we are constantly being pushed and pulled towards things that we want and away from things we don't want. It's constantly, okay, I gotta get ready to sit down at the computer because I have a meeting coming up. Great, the meeting's going on. Can't wait for this to be done so I can go and eat lunch. Once lunch is done, great, I can't wait for this to be done so I can go do the next thing. We're almost never really in the thing that we're doing at the time. But very often, what we have right now is what we previously wanted. And so by doing weight training, by being aware of our thoughts in the moment, what we can start to do is we can ask ourselves, do I have a problem right now? Because we usually don't. Even if we are stuck in traffic, do I have a problem right now? Right now, I just sit here and listen to my podcast. Right. If I'm waiting for my tea to brew, do I have a problem right now? I wait it out. So weight training allows us to reclaim this little bit of space that we have in the present moment. Now, mindfulness meditation, if you've ever been introduced to it as a practice, I can highly, highly recommend. But for those of us that are thinking, maybe I'm so busy or I don't know if it's for me, this is probably kind of a good entry point, is to practice what am I thinking training. So there is our first big trick of the mind with cognitive ease and our first technique to combat it. But we are probably going to start noticing tricks as we practice weight training. We're going to see some trends, and there's one trend in particular that I think is worth talking about before you encounter it so that you'll know how to address it when you see it. But before we get there, what kinds of questions or thoughts or comments, requests might any of us have? If you are wondering, chances are other people are wondering too. You can jump into the chat, you can jump on your microphone as rudely as you like, and I promise it's invited. If there's not, I'll try to keep an eye on chat, but just in case, I'll keep on pushing to the next point here for us. Okay, so if we see that there are certain kinds of thoughts that pop up as we practice weight training, one of the things that might start to notice that happens for everybody are what are called should statements. Should statements are an insidious kind of thought that I'll bet we'll start to notice as we watch our own thoughts. Now, a should statement is an example of what therapists call cognitive distortions. And one of the most successful forms of self-talk therapy, an intrapersonal kind of communication, is a body of work called cognitive behavioral therapy. And the book that kind of popularized this for a lay audience outside of other psychologists was a book called Feeling Good by David Burns. And in this book, one of the many distortions and tricky thoughts that Burns points out for us is the should statement. The way a should statement works is we have an idea of the way things should be. And when they are not that way, we get so mad. We get upset because something isn't the way it's supposed to be. Now, we might have should statements that are directed out towards others, or they might be directed at ourselves. If we have a should statement that's directed out at other people, it might be something along the lines of, my student should be turning this in on time. I gave them such extra time. They had 2 weeks to do this. They didn't turn it in. Now I'm mad. If we ever have a should statement directed at ourselves, that's how we start getting things like guilt and anxiety and shame. Things like, I should have included more references in my teaching philosophy in my document. Oh, but I didn't, and so I'm beating myself up for it. Or, I should have set aside extra time to grade this essay, and I didn't budget my time properly. Dumb, dumb, dumb. And so should statements, when they sneak in, can become really damaging. They drive all different kinds of anger out towards others, and they drive all kinds of destructive self-thinking on ourselves by adding extra burdens and baggage to us. But the thing that Burns points out in his book about should statements is that there actually isn't really a way things should be. Things are as they are. If there is any difference between our expectation of what things should be and how they actually are, then what that actually means is our expectations were unrealistic. Because by definition, what happens in reality is realistic. So the problem wasn't out there, the problem was in here. So what we can do is we can just start, as we notice them with weight training, we can start to pause with our own should statements. Things like, my kids should have picked up all their laundry. And what we can start to do with these is to use our second trick of the day. And that second trick is to can the shoulds. We can can them. Because even though it's not the case that things are supposed to be a certain way, things are supposed to be as they are. It would make sense if our kids didn't pick up their laundry because they tend to be forgetful. They had a long day and they got distracted by stuff. They should forget to pick up their clothes. But they can, in the future, be more mindful of picking up their clothes. Maybe it's not the case that I should have budgeted my grading time a certain way, but I can budget my grading time a certain way. The distinction between the way things are supposed to be and the way that things can be is a really illuminating and kind of refreshing breath of fresh air, just to kind of take a moment to pause and to remind ourselves that when something isn't the way we think it's supposed to be, it's really more about our own expectations being unrealistic. Now, that doesn't mean that we stop trying to improve things. Of course not. It's always helpful to try to help our kids to become more mindful of their laundry, to budget our time for grading, and just to be more time managerial. But what we can do is we can remove that second arrow, that extra pain of anger towards others, or the extra guilt that we put on ourselves when we have these expectations. Which version of you is likely to get more things done? The one that's cool and collected and lucid, or the one that's freaking out? Probably the cool, lucid one. So this is not at all, canning the shoulds is not at all about ignoring making things better and improving the world. No way. But probably the way that's best to make those improvements is to first make sure that we're okay. It's like they say on airplanes. You want to secure your own face mask before you start fixing the face masks of others. That's kind of what canning the shoulds allows us to do. We can operate at our highest level once we've kind of taken care of our stressors. So, kind of the subtitle of today's workshop, Self-Talk for Success, is about feeling better and getting more things done. Those two goals are not mutually exclusive. As we start to feel better and remove the stressors, we start to perform at a higher level because we start to see the things that call to us and we go and we do those things. Now, canning the shoulds really allows us a bit of space in between frustration and response to remind ourselves that it would be nice if something were a certain way. This is actually the phrase that Burns recommends in his book. If you're looking for a nice specific mechanism to can your shoulds, in your back pocket, you can keep that phrase, it would be nice if. If you catch yourself getting frustrated from kids leaving laundry on the floor, you might think to yourself, they should have picked it up. Ooh, there's the should statement, which you caught because you've been practicing weight training. And in that moment, you can replace it with, it would be nice if the kids were picking up their laundry off the floor more often. It would be nice if I remembered to take out the trash. It would be nice if I budgeted more time to grading these big essays than the small worksheets. Because that's kind of a tacit reminder that there are nice ways that things can be, even if they aren't that way now. I should point out, because this came up in a different version of this workshop, somebody said, so I can go around and I can say that to other people, right? Like I can say to my kids, it would be nice if you picked up your laundry. It's a little bit different, because if we start externalizing this, it could sound a little bit like passive aggressive. It would be nice if you turned in your essay on time, right? That's kind of different. So this is self-talk, just to remind ourselves that there is some space between our frustrations and our responses. So far, these have all been very kind of conscious, deliberate, effortful skills that we can use. Tricks for the rider that kind of are trying to rein in the elephant. That we would have to practice weight training consciously throughout different parts of the day. We would have to consciously stop statements. But if we want to really, really reach the elephant, the unconscious version of ourselves that likes to go where it wants, it would also be really nice to speak its language. How might we, instead of every once in a while kind of guiding and tweaking the path of our elephants, what if we could kind of directly speak to our unconscious selves to start changing the story of what we can do. The third technique that we're talking about today is the one I want to save the most time for. One, because it's a lot of fun, but also because it's probably the most long-term skill to be practicing. Things like weight training, you could be doing even right now. You can be like, oh, what was I thinking? Right? Should statements, you could be practicing throughout the course of the day. But over the course of several weeks or several months, then we can practice this third technique. But what's the big issue here? The third big villain of our unconscious minds. The third big villain, before I reveal what its name is, I can tell you about a little experiment carried out by Martin Seligman and his colleagues. Oops. What Martin Seligman and his colleagues did, rightly or wrongly, was they had some electrified floor panels that they brought doggies in on and put the doggies on. Now, the electricity was not so intense as to hurt or to kill the dogs, but it was, as you might expect, a bit uncomfortable. The doggies wouldn't want to stay on a floor panel that's electrified. Every floor panel had a little divider that the doggies could jump over. Now, there's two different conditions. In one condition, if the dogs jumped over that little divider, then the next half of the floor was unelectrified. Very comfortable for the dogs to hang around it. The other condition had electrified panels on both sides of the divider. It didn't matter if the dogs jumped over or not. They would always experience the discomfort. Now, what the researchers were really curious about was what would happen when they took dogs from the entirely electrified condition and put them in the half and half condition, where they could jump over the divider to be comfortable. Well, that's just what they did. They brought the doggies over, put them in the half and half condition. What do you think the doggies did? Well, those dogs stayed right where they were. They stayed put, even though they could have just as easily hopped over the divider and experienced relative comfort, gotten away from the electricity. They didn't know they could do that. Now, it might be easy for us to look at them and think, those poor doggies, if only they were smarter, if only they knew better, they could just jump over. But what's strange is actually their intelligence is what kept them put. What is maybe a smarter example of another mammal that might be even smarter than a dog? Rightly or wrongly, the very controversial practice of elephant training relies on a pretty similar phenomenon. That a baby elephant can be tied by a rope to a little stake in the ground, and that rope is strong enough to prevent the elephant from walking away. Now, as it grows up, you might expect that, well, you have to trade out the stake in the ground with a bigger stake. You might need stronger rope to hold the elephant there. But the strange thing is that adult elephants will stay put in the same spot with the same rope and the same stake in the ground as when they were younger. That adult elephant could be very well strong enough to just walk in a straight line, to snap that rope, or to uproot that stake in the ground and go wherever they want. But they don't. They are stuck in place not by the rope, but by their idea of the rope. It might be easy for us to look at them and think, oh, those poor elephants, if only they were smarter, if only they knew better. But the strange thing is, it is their intelligence that keeps them there. The dogs, the elephants, have learned that jumping over the divider or pulling on the rope is pointless. What is intelligence but pattern recognition? They've learned the pattern that, nope, can't do this. So they stop doing it. It's actually, weirdly, the smart thing to do. Of other mammals that might be smarter than dogs, that might be smarter than elephants, that might be held in place by their thoughts. You bet, even us. The third big villain of the day of our minds is a phenomenon called learned helplessness. If there was only one big thing to remember from today, I would hope that you would remember learned helplessness. Because all of us with our intelligence, we create our own invisible ropes. In the same way that the elephants kept themselves locked into place, we might keep ourselves locked into place with certain kinds of things. Maybe we think we're just not good enough for that position that opens up, or we can't fulfill this responsibility that maybe now is being asked of us as times are getting rough at our campuses. Or we think, who am I to go for that tenure position? Or who am I to try out this new assignment that's been really fun in my colleagues' classes? All kinds of things. This is learned helplessness in a nutshell. This also happens for our students. So even if we're not worried about this for ourselves, it's worth being aware that our students may very well be experiencing this too. Maybe some of our students, or even some of us, have in the past had a math class with a teacher that was kind of phoning it in, and we didn't perform very well. So we convince ourselves, I am bad at math. Whatever that means, math is indifferent. It works when you follow the rules of math. Math doesn't care how good you are or bad you are. Maybe this is why I talk about this in class. Maybe you've had a presentation or a student who had a presentation where they were really nervous and they didn't do so well. So now they tell themselves, I am a bad speaker. I am a nervous presenter. That now becomes the narrative. They have secured in their minds an invisible mental rope that keeps them stuck in place. And the way that we expect is how we're going to perform because of learned helplessness. Not because we're dumb, in a way, because we're smart. Our brains are looking out for us, even though they're not necessarily helping us to excel in the 21st century. It's the kind of thinking that kept us alive in the Stone Age, but doesn't keep us happy in the 21st century. So what can we possibly do about this? Well, the third technique that I want to talk about is a little technique called mental simulation. Mental simulation is exactly like it sounds. We can run rehearsals in our minds of certain outcomes that we would like to see and experience. A person who is kind of nervous about giving a presentation can close their eyes and for maybe 5 minutes at a time, a few days throughout the week, can run through what it would feel like to give that presentation at their A game, to make eye contact with everyone, to speak with voice that's so projecting and so loud that it fills the whole room. What would that feel like? This kind of absorption is actually a trait that differs from person to person. Some people are really good mental simulators. They can absorb themselves into the imagery and the ideas that they give themselves. If you have ever seen, I don't know, an online video of a skateboarder falling and like crashing onto a railing, and you think, ooh, and you kind of grimace to yourself, that is mental absorption. What caused that feeling? What made you grimace and feel pain? Nothing physical. Now, if mental simulation and mental absorption sound like kind of esoteric, kind of floofy ideas, what I think is really interesting is a meta-analysis that was conducted that was published in the Journal of Applied Psychology. And what this study of studies found was across over 3,000 participants that just the mental experience of practicing in one's mind yielded, get this, around 2/3 the benefit of actual physical practice. That is phenomenal. We're talking about musicians, like playing the saxophone. One person would actually physically play the saxophone. The other person would close their eyes and mentally practice playing the saxophone, imagining where their fingers would go and hitting certain notes. For cognitive tasks, the results were astounding. People that practiced the saxophone by thinking about it did almost as well as the people that were doing the physical practice. In some cases, you couldn't tell the difference. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you can do everything by just thinking about it. If you want to be an Olympic acrobat, you got to hit the mat. You got to do some backflips. You're not going to think your way into muscle memory. But what this meta-analysis found was that the more cognitive the task, the greater the benefit from mental rehearsal, which means you don't have to wait until it's time to actually practice to start practicing. You can absorb yourself in the sensation of confidence, productivity, contentment, whatever it is that you would like to cultivate in yourself. And if this sounds sort of abstract and esoteric, or maybe you want it to sound more abstract and esoteric, you liked it earlier and you think, ooh, meta-analysis, too sciencey. The term, this goes by many, many different names. I've already said mental simulation, practice, rehearsal, absorption, but one that's kind of caught on in popular culture outside of academia is self-hypnosis. Self-hypnosis is exactly what we're talking about here, absorbing oneself in an idea. I think when a lot of us hear the H word, we think of like swinging stopwatches and, I don't know, like swirly eyeballs, but there's no mind control involved, nothing like that. If that were the case, hypnotists could just walk into Amazon headquarters and say, I own all of this now, and then they, retire. That's not how it works. Self-hypnosis is mental absorption. We lose ourselves in the imagery of whatever it is that we're focusing on. There's kind of a bell curve here that on average, most of us, around 70 to 75% of us, are pretty average mental simulators, that we can have physical responses to the things that we immerse ourselves in mentally. But there are some people around 5 to 15% of people that are phenomenal mental simulators. That they can actually, these are the kinds of people who can think themselves warm when they're in the cold frozen food section of the grocery store. Stuff like that, who can think themselves confident. The kinds of people who, when they see the YouTube videos of people getting injured on skateboards, really feel injured themselves. That kind of stuff. So statistically, 1 out of every 10 people or so are really, really good mental simulators. And so what I thought we could do is, instead of just kind of talking generally about some of these concepts, we can run through some exercises so you get a sense of what it feels like to practice mental simulation. Because even though a lot of us on average are going to be average simulators, we can train ourselves to move into that 5 to 15% if we run through some exercises. And so this is where it starts to become much more interactive here at home, where you can try things out. So if you have the ability to, we'd love to have you on camera. We'd love to make sure that you have access to your microphone. It can be handy either by a click or by even knuckles pressing down to hold down the space bar or whatever it is. But as long as you're willing and you're able, we'd love to have you on camera with your microphones there so you get a front row seat for some of these interactive exercises. And a couple of promises that I can make to you beforehand. Promise number 1, you do not have to volunteer if you don't want to. You don't have to do that. If you just kind of want to kind of sit back and relax, you can kind of wave me away and that's totally fine. Promise number 2, I promise none of this stuff is going to be embarrassing or humiliating for anyone. I know that we dropped the H word hypnosis earlier, but I promise no one is going to be clucking like a chicken or barking like a dog or running around like a lunatic. No, that's not what this is all about. This is about a mental exercise to practice for ourselves. The third promise I can make to you is that this is a technique you can use to become very, very relaxed. Ooh. Honestly, if nothing else, a lot of us would probably just want that alone. We could probably have an entire workshop on relaxation alone. Like, some of us haven't relaxed in weeks, some of us haven't relaxed in months, maybe years. Who knows? We're stuck from one task to the next. We wake up late and go through the process, traffic, and so on and so forth. But I promise you that. You don't have to volunteer if you don't want to. You will not be embarrassed or humiliated, and you can use this same technique to get very, very relaxed, just changing the simulation. All right. So if you'd like to try this out here at home, if you got cameras at the ready and microphones at the ready and all that good stuff, let's try some exercises that apply to everyone, like in the middle of the bell curve, first of all. First thing you can do is you can sit upright in your chairs. Wonderful. You can uncross your legs if they're at all crossed, and you can rest your hands comfortably there in your lap. Perfect. Nicely done. And with your eyes, you can look away from the screen for a moment to find one spot on the wall behind you. We're going to focus on an imaginary spot between you and the wall, maybe about a foot out in front of you. I'm going to ask you to take a look at that spot, imaginary spot, and imagine a lemon floating there in the air, about a foot away from you. You can see it bright yellow. You can see its textures in the skin. And as you see that lemon there, you can imagine it being sliced in half. Imagine the juice dripping down from that lemon. Ooh, that's a nice, juicy lemon. Let's imagine for a second that half of the lemon floats towards your face. Imagine for a second what it feels like to bite into that raw lemon. And ooh, it is tart. It looked really juicy, and it is just as sour, if not more so, than it looked. What would it feel like to feel the juice flood around your teeth and in your gums? And as you take one more big bite into that lemon, more juice, more sourness, more tartness floods the mouth, washes over the tongue and around the teeth. And we'll get lemon. You can look away from that spot. You can come back here with us. Now, show of hands, how many of us here, as we imagine the lemon, could actually, as you reflect on it now, you could actually feel your mouth producing more saliva? Yeah, whoops. Whoop, there we go. Yeah, can we actually feel that? Oh, a lot of us. And thank you, those of us off camera, we're using the little reactions button there. Looks pretty unanimous. That's pretty cool. That means we have a room full of pretty good mental simulators. That's what that tells me. So if you can do this, you can reach that 5 to 15% of mental simulators. You've already done this, whether you've intended to or not. By show of hands, if I extended out in front of you a 2x4 on the ground, we just put like a block of wood, a 2x4 on the ground in front of you, by show of hands, how many of you would be able to walk across that 2x4? You'd be able to. Yeah, doesn't mean you'd want to, but you could. Like if you had to, you could win a bet or something. Yeah, okay, pretty unanimous. We could do that. Terrific. Now, what if we take that exact same 2x4 and we extend it from the rooftops of 2 skyscrapers? 2 skyscrapers way up in the air. Show of hands, how many of us are walking across that 2x4 now? Okay, no one's doing it. I'm getting some hard head shakes. Yeah, no problem. Well, that makes sense because what we've changed there is we've changed the mental experience, whatever it is that we're absorbing ourselves in. We have hypnotized ourselves to not be able to walk in a straight line. We've absorbed in ourselves the idea of wobbling legs, of losing balance. In the same way that just now you absorbed yourself in the idea of sourness and juicy lemons. Like, it created a physical response. That's crazy. The body reacted to your imagination, to a mental absorption. You probably couldn't do that even if you tried. If you just sat there on purpose and you're like, salivate now, nothing would happen. It wouldn't work. It's an involuntary response to nothing. But it's not nothing. It's kind of like they said in The Matrix, the mind makes it real. But it's true. For subjective experiences, the mind really does make it real. If we think that we are a bad speaker, then when it's time to speak, we get shaky legs and we bomb. If we think that we don't have good balance, whatever, we will not walk across a straight line, even though we could on the ground. Tightrope walkers basically unhypnotize themselves. They convince themselves, yeah, I can walk in a straight line on the ground, I can walk in a straight line up above. Doesn't really matter. We can do that for ourselves too. Here are some other exercises that we can try out too. If you want to try this out on your side of the camera with your cameras and your mics and stuff like that, you can try out something with our hands. If you want to try this experiment out, this is more of a physical one. You can reach out with your hands just like this. Terrific. You can clasp them together just like this. Wonderfully done. And now you can bring your hands up in front of you just like this. Thank you so much. And now you can extend your pointer fingers, your 2 index fingers out in front of you just like this, about 1.5 inches to 2 inches apart. Now don't look at me, look at the space between those fingers, because in a moment those fingers are going to start to pull together. Imagine them like 2 powerful magnets. That's it. Every little twitch pulls those fingertips closer and closer. That's it. You can feel that force and imagine that force becoming stronger the closer they get, like 2 powerful magnets pulling closer and closer, right the way close, right the way stuck, and freeze. You can unlock your hands. You can shake out your fingertips now. Isn't that the strangest thing? By show of hands, how many of you actually saw your fingers moving together physically? Isn't that so strange? And it's a different experience. What we're looking for here is not something like this, where someone goes, ooh, look at that, that's amazing. No, anyone can on purpose move their fingertips together. But this, what I'm talking about, is a byproduct of what you're focusing on. It kind of feels like the fingertips are moving, they're kind of like little twitches, like it's happening on its own, like our mouth is salivating on its own. What's cool is that you don't actually have to like pretend. These things happen all on their own, which is kind of fascinating. So that suggests we probably have a room of pretty good simulators, which means I think we can probably step it up a little bit, I think. So what I can do is, let's try this one out. Let's swing for the fences. Let's go for an exercise that I think is going to be really effective for those of us in like the 5 to 10%, something like that. Because we've got about 13 people. Okay, so statistically, we're going to see anywhere from 0 to 1 or 2 people, maybe. We'll see. So we can try it out. If you want to try this exercise out, what you can do is you can extend your left hand out in front of you just like this. Perfect. And you can extend your right hand out in front of you like this. Perfect. Now, on your dominant hand, whichever hand that is, like if it's your right hand, whatever your dominant hand is, I want you to imagine seeing a clear capsule filled with superglue. A little clear capsule filled with superglue. And once you have that image, you can take your non-dominant hand and you can clasp it over top of that capsule. You can curl your fingers around your hands, and now you can squeeze tight, 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 tight. Squeezing, locking, fusing those hands together. Now, don't look at me. I want you to look at one spot on your hands, anywhere on your hands. Get focused on that one spot. I'll let you know when to look away. What I'm going to do, as you continue to squeeze, as you hear my voice, you can continue to squeeze, lock down those fingers nice and tight. I'm going to count backwards from 3 to 1. And at some point, I want you to imagine what it would feel like for that capsule of glue to burst, and then to start gluing, locking, and fusing those hands together so that they wouldn't even pull apart as you tried, so that the more you would try to pull them apart, the more stuck tight, sealed, and locked they would become to each other. Feel that experience locking, fusing now, starting off with 3, squeezing, tight, 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 locking, fusing, squeezing. I'm not sure which hand you feel locking, sticking tighter to the other one, but as you become aware of which hand it is, notice how both hands start to stick and lock even more tightly to each other. Down to 2. If it hasn't happened already, you can feel that capsule burst. What would it be like to feel the glue oozing around in your palms, locking them to each other? Maybe oozing around through any tiny microscopic gaps to lock the fingers down. As it starts to cure, you can feel the warmth of the chemical reactions. You might even feel some stiffness running down your wrists, even down to the elbows. You can feel that locking, fusing, sticking, stuck tight, all the way down to 1 as that glue seals, locks, hardens, sticks those hands together as if those 2 hands were carved from a single block of wood, so that if you were to try to pull them apart, you would just feel them start to stick even more tightly. In fact, give it a try. Give it a little wiggle there. See what it's like to feel those hands as they stick tighter to each other. Notice how every little wiggle sticks them tighter and tighter. Genuinely try to pull your hands apart. Notice how they stick and lock and seal shut tight. Genuinely try to pull those hands apart. If your hands are genuinely stuck right now, wave them around in front of the camera so that we can see you. If your hands are genuinely stuck, like you're really trying to pull them apart and they are not pulling apart, you're not just messing around, that is the strangest thing. Okay, we got to get in touch with some people here. That is the craziest thing. Tell you what, I'm going to count backwards from 3 to 1. We can unfuse those hands. 3, 2, and 1, melting away the glue, unfusing it, and kind of getting some circulation back. You can shake your hands out now. That is the strangest thing. It's kind of hard to tell with our hands stuck. Show of hands. How many of us actually had our hands physically locked, stuck to each other? How many of us actually felt that? Yeah? Quite a few of us there. Ooh, Kristen from the other side of the camera. It's a good thing I counted down to unstick us then. That is the trippiest thing. Would you mind? I see Jay here. Looks like Jay Moani, is it? Is it Moani? Would you mind jumping on microphone there with us? What did that feel like as your hands were stuck to each other?
Unusual, because I wasn't
Unusual?
in control.
I felt like you weren't in control? Yeah. That's like, and it's not like I didn't like send you an email before the workshop. It was like, hey, we're gonna do this, just play along, right? Just pretend. Like you were really trying to pull your hands apart?
Yeah.
You really were. That's the
And
strangest thing.
I normally don't, like, I've watched that guy at the county fair and he never gets me at the county fair, and I have to admit, like the first 5 seconds, it was really tight. After that, it loosened.
Oh, cool. Okay. Outstanding. So it was really tight and yeah, that's kind of funny. It didn't work at the county fair, but all of us can become mental absorbers. I'm trying to remember who was raising their hands. I forget. Shauna, did you have your hands actually stuck? Was that going on? Yeah, would you mind jumping on microphone? What was that like?
Yeah, that was weird. I could see my fingers turning purple.
Your fingers were turning purple.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry about that. It's a good thing we unlocked them when we did. And it's not like, okay, because people watching this now and people like watching at home, they're going to be like, no, like this is fake. Like they're just playing along. But you weren't just playing along, right? You were really trying to pull your hands apart. Wow. Has anything like that ever happened before? No, it hasn't. Who else? I think Mark, were your hands stuck? I don't recall. Were they stuck there, Mark?
Yeah, mine were stuck. I've had a similar thing happen once with my fingers, with the glue, and so I imagined what it was like with my whole hand. And as I was, bringing it together, I was actually I'm like, oh my God, why am I shaking? I'm like shaking because I remember that feeling when you can't pull it apart. It's horrible, and you felt confined.
Yeah. That's terrific. There is kind of a shakiness quality to it, right? I think I saw some of that too on camera. Some of us were kind of shaking with with our hands there. Now, if this seems like an odd experience, nothing in this workshop is unique to this workshop. It happens outside too. If you probably know the feeling of being just stuck metaphorically in life somehow. You just can't get started on the day's tasks. Or you just can't get out of bed sometimes. It's like you're stuck to the bed. Of course you could. Like if there was an explosion outside, you would jump right out. But somehow you just can't. You just can't get out of bed, or you can't get started on this project, can't get started on this paper. What if we could flip the script? What if we could become stuck to our goals? What if we could become stuck to our good habits, stuck to our tenacity? We genuinely can. If you've ever felt like I can't do this, great. Like if you're like, oh, I'm too full of doubts. That's one I hear. I doubt myself too much. Terrific. Doubt your doubts. Use what you have. This is stuff that your brain is going to do anyway, so you can start to direct it. Okay, so we had some pretty good response here. Let's go for some more. What the heck? If definitely for the 3 people I talked to, I'd ask you to try this out because I think we're going to have a great response here. Moani, Shauna, Mark. I think there were some others I didn't get a chance to talk to. I think maybe Cheryl at home. I forget who had their hands raised. But anyway, all of you are certainly welcome to try this out. You can take your dominant hand there in front of you, the one that we had the capsule on, and you can go ahead and you can place that on top of your head. Now, all of you remember that feeling you had a second ago when those hands were stuck. I want you to remember that feeling and bring it back up here onto the top of the head. And we're going to squeeze down tight now onto the top of the head, squeezing down that hand and bring that sensation of stuckness to the top of the head. And as you start to bring that feeling in place, you might notice which of your fingers starts to stick more tightly than the others. As soon as you become aware, notice how all of them start to stick. I'll count backwards from 3 down to 1. By the time we hit 1, it's going to feel like that hand and that head are fused from the same block of wood. Starting off with 3, squeezing, locking, tight, tight, tight. You can feel where on your palm it sticks most to the top of your head. 2, you can feel some of the warmth now forming as the fusion between the hand and the head starts to lock into place. Down to 1, that entire hand, that wrist locking, that elbow, almost as if the skull and the bones in the hand were carved out of a simple block of wood. So try to pull and notice just how stuck that tends to stay. Give it a little wiggle. See what that feels like as it stays stuck tight as you feel that for the first time. Try to genuinely lift that hand. See what happens. See how it sticks even tighter, locking, fusing, sticking as you try to pull it off. I'll let you know. We will release you later on, I promise. But there are a few of us. Genuinely try. If you're genuinely trying, kind of wiggle your elbow around over here so we know you're really trying. Don't just play along. If you're really genuinely trying, this is the strangest thing here for us. Let's see. Do we have a free hand, Shauna, there? Do you have a free hand? Oh, there we go. It came off. For those of us that are still stuck, we can unrelease it. We'll count backwards from 3 to 1. 3, 2, and 1. Releasing, unfusing, locking. There, Cheryl, looks like it was stuck up there for you. Shauna, it looks like we broke it as soon as I zoomed in on you there. That's kind of funny. Cheryl, can you jump on microphone there? What did that feel like for you?
Well, it was weird because it felt like the hand was becoming a part of my skull.
Yeah. So what did it feel like when you tried to lift?
Well, it surprised me the first couple of seconds that my fingers and my hand didn't want to respond. And so at that point, I'm thinking this is ridiculous. And so then it did start to, but initially I couldn't get them to let go. Yeah.
That's so strange. As long as we're like concentrated on the thought, we're absorbed in it, it becomes real. We couldn't pretend even if we wanted to. Shauna, until I kind of zoomed in on you there, what were you experiencing? What were you feeling?
My hair, like my head was getting itchy. I wanted to get it off.
Oh, that's funny. Like itchy, like underneath.
Yeah, underneath. So I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's, like fusing together.
Wow. That's
I
so,
like, oh, I have a wig.
Wow, that's so trivial. It kind of feels, it feels like separate, like it's more part of the hand than on the head. Wow, that's so cool. And that's a feeling like you can't really like pretend to have, but we get lost in absorption around us. We run a mental simulation. So that's pretty cool. I was expecting anywhere from 0 to 1 or 2, but we have a lot of really good simulators here. We got Mark, Shauna, Cheryl, Moani. We got people back at home, I think, imagine, I can't even see right now on camera. So we have a lot of really good simulators here. That's really, really cool. So if you've ever felt stuck in life or stuck to a bad habit, you could just as easily become stuck, literally, like we see here today, to whatever you want. The reason I'm doing these exercises with you here today is to show tangibly just how powerful our mental simulators are. This is stuff that you couldn't pretend even if you wanted to. And I always like to stop and make sure, like I didn't like email anybody to like tell you just play along. Yeah, like you experienced it with the lemon stuff. You couldn't like do that on command even if you tried. So we have, just for time's sake, we also can use mental absorption to kind of regulate feelings and emotions, cognitive states too, not just like physical things like our habits or like what we're stuck to. So we can try this out. I'm certainly especially speaking here to Cheryl, to Shauna, to Mark, to Moani, but for the rest of us, you are more than welcome to try this out at home too. Certainly more than welcome. But for relaxation, we could also just as well do this. So if the 4 of you that I just named are certainly open to this, you can give me a little nod of the head so I can try it. This is a relaxation exercise. Terrific. Okay, and I promise we're not going to be embarrassing anybody. Same old. But this is something that you can take with you even after the workshop today. You can use any time. And it's one of my favorite things to introduce to students because my students will get nervous before presentations and things like that. But this is for relaxation. So whatever other kinds of mental thoughts and things we had at the moment, whatever multitasking we had in our minds, self-monitoring or questioning, whatever, for the moment, just try to be present with me and kind of set aside those things. And for those of you that are going to try this out, I'd like you to imagine a ball. You can shift your gaze for a second to around where the lemon was. I'm going to ask you to imagine that out there in the air is floating a ball. And that ball is about the size of a softball. And I want you to imagine that it's going to start floating towards you. This is like a little ball of relaxation. For all of you there at home, you can rest your back comfortably against your chair as you look at this ball. You can take a deep breath in through your nose. And you can breathe out slowly. Wonderfully done. And as you exhale, and you can continue to breathe nice and deep and slow as you look at this ball, I want you to imagine that as I count backwards from 3 to 1, that this ball is going to start to get closer and closer to your forehead. And as it reaches your forehead, you can experience more and more relaxation as it gets closer. With every exhale, you can feel all the stressors of the day leaving your body. So that by the time it reaches your forehead and touches, when I count from 3 down to 1, as it touches your forehead, you would finally be able to close your eyes and to dip your chin forwards and to relax fully as all the stressors of the day start to leave the body. Starting off with 3. We'll all take a deep breath in together. And as you breathe out slowly, that ball gets a little bit closer. And you can notice the tension in the shoulders start to melt away. Down to 2, as that ball gets closer, all the tension in the face around the eyes and the cheeks can start to melt away and just exit the body with the breath. And you might start to notice some heaviness around the eyes. And as that ball gets closer and closer and reaches 1, you can just go ahead and finally relax those eyes to allow them to close down. As we hit 1, as that ball touches the forehead and just fills our mind with relaxation and comfort and allows all the stressors of the day to leave with our breath. All the tension in the neck, all the tension in the arms, down through the abdomen, down to the legs, leaving through the breath. How nice that is. I'm going to count backwards from 3 to 1 now as you continue to breathe deep and relax in this nice, comfortable place all for yourself. And with every time I count down, you can take this sense of relaxation and you can find it naturally sink down to twice the level of comfort that you have each time. So you can take a deep breath in now. With 3, as you exhale slowly, you can exhale all the remaining tension from the fingertips, from the toes, the jaw as you sink down twice as relaxed. Down to 2, unwinding all the tension in the muscle fibers of the shoulders, of the eyes, of the nose, even around the jaw. As we drop down, doubling in relaxation down to 1, deep asleep, deeply relaxed, more and more relaxed. You are concentrating perfectly. And just for a moment, just to enjoy this comfortable place of relaxation that you have for yourself, that you could return to anytime you wanted to. You could count yourself backwards from 3 down to 1. You could even just be ready to jump right back to the state with a snap of your fingers if you wanted to. Now that you've anchored this place for yourself and you know this feeling and how familiar it is. I'll count from 1 to 3 and we can open our eyes, coming back feeling nice and refreshed. Eyes open to the count of 3. 1, 2, and 3. Eyes open, wide awake, coming on back to us now. Terrific, wonderfully done. In the same way we get absorbed with sensations of getting stuck, we can get absorbed into feelings of comfort and to relaxation. And so if you were following along with this and you might want a chance to relive this experience, we could completely and absolutely do that right now. Who was I speaking to one-on-one in particular? Mawani, Shauna there with us, Cheryl there with us. But for the rest of you, if you want to follow along, you're more than welcome to do that too. But for the three of you that I just named, if you would do me a favor and take a look right here, if you would, take a look right here and take a deep breath in. And just sleep and just relax. Exhale. Slowly, nice and relaxed, just floating, drifting, more and more relaxed, more and more relaxed. You are concentrating perfectly. Eyes open, the count of three. 1, 2, 3, wide awake. Eyes open. Hey, there we are. Terrific. For all of us there at home, we can give some love. We can give them some applause for our volunteers here. They are working those simulators for us very powerfully. Let's see. See the person I'm speaking to right here. Could you jump on microphone for a second? Could you let us know what that felt like on your end? What did that feel like?
It felt like I started to drool because
Yeah.
I was so relaxed.
Isn't that cool?
That's how I know that I'm in a comfort place.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
And it felt all the aches and pains were not there.
Very cool.
So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There might be a few of us here at home who have like who carry around some aches and pains and stuff, and it kind of melts away. You couldn't do that. You couldn't fake that if you wanted to. It happens as a byproduct of our absorption. Perfect. So let's see. Just the person I'm speaking with right now. Could you do us a favor? Because we have a very powerful mental simulator here with us. You have quite a mind for absorption and relaxation like this, and it's a wonderful talent to be able to have. If you could do me a favor, would you look right here, if you would? Just look right here and take a deep breath in. And just sleep, just relaxing, drifting slowly all the way down, right the way deep. And you see how nice it is just to be able to quickly and just naturally slip into this comfortable place for us. And just the person I'm speaking to now, in a moment, we're going to count to 3 and you can open your eyes and come on back to us. It's going to be the strangest sensation, but one of the things you're going to feel, it's kind of like remembering a dream. The more you try to think about it, the more distant it becomes, the more fuzzy it becomes, the more difficult it becomes to remember. You can imagine right now as you continue to relax and to breathe that your name just starts to wipe itself from your mind, that your name just kind of gets erased, like being erased off of a chalkboard. So that if we were to ask, it just wouldn't come back. It would be stuck somewhere, like trying to remember a dream, just the person I'm speaking to now. You can let that suggestion sink into your mind as that name gets wiped away from your mind. And you can come on back to us on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, eyes open, wide awake. Hey there. Let's give some love to our volunteers. They are working these mental simulators for us really, really powerfully. I'm sorry, while you have your mic on, I'd like to get to know everybody I work with. But I'm Chris. I introduced myself at the outset here. What's your name?
Me?
Yeah. What's your name?
Jamie Monikiala Whittle Wagner.
Oh, perfect. Jamie, wonderfully done. That works out terrific. Let's give her a hand. She's got it. Okay, terrific. Okay, perfect. I'm glad that happened because different kinds of suggestions work differently for us. So what we have here is we have really good responsivity to physical suggestions like relaxation and hand clasps. And different people will have different responses to like cognitive suggestions, like forgetting fears or synthesizing confidence, stuff like that. So those kinds of cognitive experiences, sometimes people will forget their names or like they will do math differently and stuff like that. Some people, as you practice this for yourself, you might have things like sensory experiences. Like some people are really responsive to like tasting the lemon or feeling textures on their fingertips, like feeling ticklish things. And so as you practice mental simulation for yourself, what you'll find is that you will be more responsive, just like Jamie here, to different kinds of suggestions. And so you can just play on your strengths and you don't have to try to simulate every experience. If you find that you're really responsive to things like relaxation, great, go nuts on the relaxation suggestions. If you're really responsive to things like the physical sensations, like your hands get stuck to your head or stuff like that, great, you can go for those. As you walk into your presentation, you walk in there with a straight posture and comfortable shoulders. Mental suggestions. There we go. I'm the one forgetting stuff. So, or if it's a cognitive thing, like we're running out of time here in a second. But for those of us that are responsive to cognitive suggestions, we might lose names or spelling and things like that. We can lose our feelings of fear or our nervous thoughts, our should statements for that matter. So we can find where it is our talents lie and we can lean into those. That's what's so much fun about this bell curve here, is that this is on average for everybody, but different kinds of suggestions might put you in the 5%. Maybe you're in the 5% for physical suggestions or for relaxation. But nonetheless, I hope one way or another, everybody gets a chance to pull something out of here in their conversations with their unconscious. Because whether we like it or not, our conscious and unconscious are talking to each other. So what we can do is we can watch out for cognitive ease, right? Whatever it is, we are what we repeatedly do. So what are we repeatedly thinking all the time? It could be the case that we are complaining, we're gossiping, or it could be the case that we're appreciating, that we're savoring and enjoying. And so a little bit of weight training will give us the opportunity to spot exactly what it is that we're doing every day. And we can can the shoulds. We might start to spot those should statements that create frustration or guilt and shame. And the long-term practice that we can have, my most favorite one, because it takes on one of the biggest villains of our intelligent minds, to take on learned helplessness, we can do some mental simulation. We can absorb ourselves in the sensations that we want to experience, being stuck to our good habits, or being more confident and relaxed, or forgetting about the fears that we want to get rid of. Because if we're exposed to those over and over again, we can't help but have some kind of a response. In the same way that our mouths produced more saliva, or our fingers moved toward each other, or our hands had a hard, even for those that actually could pull our hands apart, I'll bet there are others out there amongst you that had a hard time pulling the hands apart. That's a real response too. So we can get a little bit more progress with different kinds of self-talk, whether it's the conscious version of ourselves talking to the unconscious, like with weight training and with should statements, or whether we go right to the elephant and to immerse ourselves in a kind of unconscious self-talk with absorption and experience. Our brains are going to do it anyway. We're going to be absorbed in the feeling of nervousness, apprehension, or we could be absorbed in the feeling of tenacity, confidence, energy. And if you start to immerse yourself in it, the mind makes it real. Your body can't help but respond over time. It's a fascinating skill that all of us have, as long as it gets pointed out to us. So now that you know your mind is going to be doing this whether you want it to or not, you get the reins. You get to decide now how you want to start directing your experience. And that is what I have for you here in our Mālama workshop series, Self-Talk for Success. Get more done and feel better doing it. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We can give a bunch of love to all of our volunteers here, stretching their imaginations and showing off their mental simulators. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I appreciate it.